Welcome to another episode of the Future Money podcast presenting the Interledger Salon. We're hoping you enjoy the summer as much as we are, and in this month's episode we have our CEO and President Briana Marbury join us with insightful conversations with Dr. Allan Davids of the University of Cape Town and Dr. Andrew Mangle of Bowie State University. Today we'll dive deeper into the Interledger Foundation's work on campus involvement and innovative partnerships with universities. Our guest will explore the intersection between the Interledger community and higher education, shedding light on the challenges and triumphs of integrating open payments into university curriculum. Stay tuned for another episode packed with insights and inspirations from leaders in the field.
Well, hello and welcome again. My name is Chris Lawrence. I'm from Interledger Foundation, and you have come to the second installment of the Interledger Salon. We do one of these a quarter. We did one in the first quarter, which you can find on our website. We'll put some links in the chat to the last conversation if you'd like to listen to that one. And today we record live our second conversation, where we're going to be looking a little bit more deeply at our Interledger on campus work and some of the partnerships and where we're going with students, professors, universities across the globe. Speaking of that, I'd like to give a quick shout out and kind of infomercial that we do actually have a grant opportunity out in the ecosystem. We are looking for letters of intent from any accredited university who would like to look at open payments, digital financial inclusion, Interledger protocol, open protocols in general, and think about how you might bring opportunities to students in career pathways going forward. So if you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube, we will be putting a link to that opportunity into the chat, but you can also find it just at interledger.org/education and get all the information that you need. And we're always here and reach out and to talk about that opportunity. But no one wants to hear me continue on. You're here for our panel today, which will be talking about our Interledger on campus work. So we'll be joined today by Dr. Allan Davids, Senior Lecturer, Economics at the School of Economics at the University of Cape Town. We'll also be joined by Dr. Andrew Mangle, Associate Professor of Management Information Systems at Maryland's oldest historically black college and university, Bowie State. And we will be hosted, facilitated, and moderated by Interledger Foundation President and CEO, Briana Marbury. And with that, I will pass it off to Briana. Briana?
Thanks so much, Chris. I'm really excited to have this conversation today. Thank you, Dr. Mangle and Dr. Davids, for joining me for this conversation. From the first day that I started at Interledger, I knew that I wanted education to be a foundational focus of ours. So not only has education been a lifelong passion of mine, I feel a big part of constructing the future that we are trying to build of expanding digital financial inclusion and making sending payments as easily as an email a reality. That meant bringing those who would eventually take the helm into the fold. So we started our first pilot program with Bowie State, as we mentioned, Dr. Mangle as a leading professor, our OG. Dr. Mangle, I'm really curious to know what you were thinking when this person who you've never heard of in the payment space, and for those of us who work in this space now know that it's not big, so everyone knows everybody, a person who you never heard of comes to you with this idea, and what made you say yes?
Thank you first, Briana, for inviting me to the salon today. It's just another great opportunity to collaborate with others in open payments. I just met with Dr. Davids in South Africa a week ago, and I think it's a great question. I don't think I've really been asked before, how did we get here? And I think the challenges of bluntly, it wasn't an immediate yes. It wasn't a no either, but we're kicking around where does this fit? So is it computer science? Is it economics? Is it information systems? Is it business? Is it sociology? Because open payment sort of crosses all these different areas. So in the university academia, though, it does one of these, who's supposed to do it? And everyone points a different finger. But taking the lead with questions like who does it? And these opportunities usually have to filter down through administration. So administration says, well, where does this go? So it actually wound up in a different area. And then we sort of had to bring it back. It was in computer science. And I thought this really overlaps with I think business, and now I would say like, I don't think it really fits any place. It could fit anywhere. So realistically, we interacted. There was a mutual connection in the space through a collaboration through another HBCU. We approached it with hesitation, which I think some people do as well, because companies approach. And I know that our first talk, I was probably more aggressive than I should have been, which was like, is this going to be a short-term thing? I mean, I'm used to
Yeah.
the like, oh, they just want to have their name, like they want to workshop and then they want to leave, or they just want to hire people, or my favorite one is just give us our best people and we'll see you never. But that wasn't the case with this and still is not the case. So we did sort of a long and slow approach, like a back and forth, like, what are you trying to do? And we were looking for long-term collaborations. And that's how we got to a yes, is I think the next gen grant opportunity, what's going on in University of Cape Town, these are not just like, oh, we're going to go into single events. These are trying to make an impact and understand that the impact is not a switch, it's a knob, and realistically encouraging innovation, exploration, student engagement, participation. So we got to a yes, but I think this process, like we're just in a better place with all these opportunities, people who've done it before to really amplify it. But I think realistically, the Interledger community, as soon as you engage with it, gets you to a yes pretty quickly. And that's what happened to me 3 years ago. And I think it's even better today.
Thank you for going along with me and my idea that everyone was like, what are you talking about? So I really appreciate your partnership from day one on this. So since you have been here from the first day, how have you seen the program evolve and the different interests of the students evolve since you've been working on this program?
Since day one, we've really expanded from, I think we were originally like, let's just introduce students. And
Yeah.
yeah, like just talk about it.
It's funny because I in my head I was like, okay, let's take these students who never heard of open payments before, never heard of Interledger, and this complicated technology stack, because those were the days even before Rafiki. Let them learn this technology stack in like 2 weeks and then present a project at the end of the class. And it didn't quite turn out that way, but I think even the first pilot was great. So I'll let you talk there.
We were, I think this is what makes working with Interledger great, is we were not committed to one thing. We were flexible. We had weekly follow-ups on this is what's working, this wasn't working. The grant was supportive of flexibility to adapting to challenges. So we started with like this, oh, we'll just do it in a class. Then it became like, let's engage them in the summit. Let's prepare them for the summit. Let's bring in our community ambassadors. So we had like 6 presentations on trying to get this to student engagement. So they could see it. So students have to see the role of open payments in their lives and what that looks like. So one of the things like local communities impacted by predatory lending, that's not every student, but a student who has payday loans, pawn shops, liquor stores for cash payments, like they get the value of lower cost, high speed, secure transactions. We also have creatives recognizing inequities. So students who run TikToks or Instagrams or like Shopify businesses, they realize like if we produce content, like we're really not getting much of a return for this. And if we do, it takes a long time. We also have international citizens, so our global citizens that are coming to campus recognize like it is a pain to move dollars to whatever currency. It takes time, there's so much cost. And the thing is career opportunities. So we started and gained interest by trying to identify like how do we put this open payments in terms students understand with challenges they face. And we've done that in different ways, but I think it's been effective. And I think there's another piece to this too, like the idea of career pathways, because I think the skills that students receive with these partnerships are applicable anywhere. These are life skills, communication, empathy, technology, team development. I could go on, we're limited to time, but there's so much that is beyond just like, oh, this is just about Interledger. This is about an open source, open communities, open payments where you're getting students involved. And I think one of the barriers to like interest to it is like getting awareness and then getting people to participate. And we've provided a great roadmap and on ramping for students. And I think that's built excitement. That's what we call like Interledger is. We are far more along. Like it is part of our strategic plan. It is part of every one of our meetings. Like this is what's going on. Here are the events. Here are the workshops. Like students are much more aware. And I think that's sort of the Next Gen grant is setting up for helping others get embedded on campus and these opportunities to get students involved to make a real impact.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's really amazing to see how the program has grown at Bowie State, but also at the Interledger Foundation ourselves. And we're continuing to grow our education initiatives. And that includes working with the University of Cape Town with Dr. Davids. Dr. Davids, can you give us a brief intro about yourself and the work that you're doing at UCT around the Innovation Hub and how you first heard of Interledger?
Certainly. And to just echo Andrew's sentiments, thank you so much for having me here, Briana. So I'm based at the University of Cape Town in the School of Economics, where I am a senior lecturer. And for the past, I think it is now 3 years, I've convened our master's degree in financial technology. It's a degree that we're very proud of. It, to this date, remains the only master's in financial technology available at any university in Africa, and there's sort of handful, and one of sort of a handful of master's degrees that address a sort of similar topic globally. The sort of big motivation for us setting up this degree was that the nature of the workplace and the nature of the world we live in today is increasingly interdisciplinary. Right? It's not enough to just be an economist or just be a computer scientist or just be an information scientist. You need sort of a bit of skill, and you certainly need some insight from all of these disciplines. But we sort of felt, at least in the sort of South African context, that, you know, while the workplace has certainly adjusted to this multi or interdisciplinary world, universities had not at that stage, right? We were still offering degrees that were very much siloed. You had a degree in computer science economics, but there were very few degrees that actually gave students an opportunity to sort of interact with courses, subjects, and topics across multiple disciplines. So we started this master's degree in fintech, where students take courses in economics, students take courses in information systems, and students take courses in computer science as well, to try to really create this degree that I think sort of speaks to the skill set that students are going to require to be successful in the modern world. We also realize, especially in sort of our African context, that, you know, unemployment is a stubborn and a very persistent social ill that we certainly experience in South Africa, where sort of our unemployment rate and our youth unemployment rate is the highest in the world. And I think sort of if you speak to any economist in the space, a sort of clear solution to this is trying to incentivize students to create startups and to try to build businesses from the ground up. I think sort of we've had many years of trying to solve an unemployment crisis through large multinational companies. I think it's quite clear to see that, especially in our context, we need a sort of community-driven, much smaller scale model. And we have many students that sort of come through the university every year that have amazing ideas, but these students sort of struggle to find the resources and they struggle to find the assistance to help them commercialize these ideas into viable startups. And as a result, a student may have a promising idea, but ultimately they'll submit their dissertation and they'll get snapped up by someone in the financial services industry, and that idea goes to waste. And we try to address this by creating a research center in the School of Economics called the Financial Innovation Hub, where we employ a bunch of developers, but we also employ a commercialization manager. And the idea is that we try to work with students throughout the 2 years they spend with us to sort of come up with a very viable startup idea, and then provide them with the resources within the hub to help them commercialize that idea, find funding, and hopefully sort of spin that idea and that sort of startup idea out into a fully fledged company. So the Innovation Hub's been around now for 3 years. 3 years as well, and we've produced sort of 3 or 4 startups out of the space that are currently, you know, going strong, are hiring employees, and have successfully raised funding. Circling back to the Interledger Foundation, where did I first hear about the foundation? I think sort of I heard about the Interledger protocol before I heard about the Interledger Foundation, and that sort of comes through the work of Coil, Stefan's company. Coil had an office based in Cape Town. So sort of Cape Town, especially the fintech community, is a very small community, so you tend to know everyone. And I've grown to know Adrian, and Sabino at the time was at Coil. and sort of seeing their fantastic work using the Interledger protocol to sort of enable web monetization, which I think for the first time showed us a sort of alternative business model to sort of advertising based, the sort of standard advertising based model. And I was sort of quite shocked, I think about a year or two ago, when I sort of saw this announcement out of nowhere that Coil was shutting up shop and closing down. But then I was very much encouraged to hear that sort of the work of Coil and web monetization was going to continue under the umbrella of the Interledger Foundation. And sort of through that announcement and sort of reading up about the foundation, discovering that this protocol that was developed many years before was applicable to questions of open payments, applicable to questions of digital financial inclusion outside of these very specific questions of web monetization, was a sort of major eye-opener for me.
Amazing. And so to kick off our partnership, you just developed and ran a 1-week intensive with students at the University of Cape Town. Can you walk us through how it was developing that experience and what happened? And we can talk about the finale after.
Yeah, it was certainly a very enriching experience, a very stressful experience as well. I think sort of initially, sort of when we agreed to sort of this 1-week boot camp, the idea was, well, let's take a bunch of students from different disciplines, let's put them in a room together, and in the space of a week, from a Monday to a Friday, let's get them from the point of not knowing anything about open payments to being pros in the space.
that even faster than me. Okay.
Yeah, and at the time it was like a fantastic idea. I think as we got closer and closer to the actual event, I sort of realized how daunting this was. But I found it to be quite a stimulating intellectual challenge. I sort of do think that the value of a concept or the value of an idea is how easily that idea can get distilled in the minds of non-experts. Sort of going through this whole process and designing that content and realizing that, hey, if we have students spend 5 days with us, we're able to sort of take them from a point of not knowing anything to a point where they're able to sort of design their own applications and sort of identify interesting use cases. To me, sort of illustrated, I think, the wonderful simplicity and intuitiveness of the work that the foundation is trying to do, and the whole ideology behind open payments. The experience was definitely filled with a lot of learnings, and it was also sort of interesting to see how students adapted and sort of struggled with different things. So we sort of had computer scientists who were amazing when it came to sort of implementing a lot of these solutions, but maybe struggled with some of the use cases around sort of how payment systems work, whereas things were completely the opposite for students coming, let's say, from an economics background. So sort of seeing students struggle through the week, but then through the course of the week, make friends in other disciplines and sort of leverage off the skill sets within the classrooms and sort of use each other's skill sets to sort of build successful teams and sort of mini communities within that classroom. This was a really sort of encouraging thing to see.
Yeah, so not only making new friends outside of their disciplines, but making new friends at different universities, because Dr. Mangle brought some of his students over. So there was a finale of a hackathon at the end, and I heard that it was amazing. I wish I could have been there. I'd like for you both to share, what were some of the outcomes of the hackathon?
Can I make a quick comment and then I'll Dr. David's comment? So we were trying to form teams, and he talks about those computer scientists and those non-computer scientists. So we're all trying to figure out teams, because it's I don't, Bowie student myself, don't know anyone other than Dr. Davids and some of the Interledger team members. And someone said to me I can't code, but I have snacks. that was their recruitment tool. And I was like, I can code, I don't want to code. But I was like, that's not as much of a motivator for me now at my age. But it was interesting to see people sort of come together. We did sort of high speed training immersion. Dr. Davids led the banking part of it, which is something that at Bowie State, I don't cover because that's not my area of expertise. So it was nice to see the things that I didn't cover, get up to speed on. And then also we did a deep dive. So the second half was protocol development, and it was interesting to see how fast, and how far the tool has come along. So if people have been with Interledger 2 years ago, like we're like the growing pains of anything new, like building out. I call it like there's probably a proper term Interledger has in house, like a stack. I call it like you have the protocol, then you have like the wallet space, then you have the APIs that can use that. Well, now that's pretty solid. So like that was able to provide. I don't want to get technical here, but like a Docker, like you could download it. You go to Rafiki and Finboss, you could do it as well. We did Rafiki and we did Finboss, but the idea of like you could quickly like get it working. Like they had a working prototype, and then students could take their concept to another concept. So we, again, I attended, I supported, I came with a graduate student in C-Tech outside of my college, outside of my major, and it just emphasizes like we went in there. My student has not taken my course, has only given my my pre-materials, like my I was like, read this ahead of time, prepare yourself ahead of time, but really had not done any development. To be able to go in 5 days, be able to produce a working solution with 5 people who did not know us at all, who I don't know their exposure to it, and then like have a good work solution applied to a challenge facing students, which is basically their like financial aid, like slow payments, like did they get paid, which I heard that's been a real challenge. So not a Bowie problem, a South Africa problem. Like, just it's really impressive to turn that around. And we were not alone. Like, there was probably I think 7 teams, and these were larger teams. So it's not only like one person, 2 person. Like the team I was on was a team of 7 people. I think there was an even larger team. There would have been a smaller team, but like be able to produce that very quickly. And Dr. Davids at the end was like, I need to go to bed. Like that. So at the end of the time, he's like, it's been great talking with you, but I'm dying here. So I appreciate all the work he did. And I think it was just very successful. Coordination was amazing. I wish more people would be there, but I mean, there was a lot of people though. Like I think it might've been around 50. Like you cannot understand like how many people were there and engaged. I call it like hands-on keyboards. Like they were really trying to contribute, and they had great ideas too. I don't want to steal Dr. David's thunder, but I think I cannot emphasize enough how successful it was, how much of an impact it was, and for a first major event, like amazing.
Dr. Davids, were most of the 50 people students from the School of Economics or cross-disciplinary?
All of the students, I think, outside of 3 or 4, I'm counting Dr. Mangle as a student in this definition, were actually all from the University of Cape Town, and they were varied both in terms of discipline. So we had students from information systems, engineering, finance, economics, fintech, data science as well. But the students were also varied in terms of the level they were at. So we sort of had second-year computer science students, and we sort of had honors students in information systems. So it was a sort of a varied bunch in terms of discipline, but also in terms of level as well, which again sort of proved a big challenge for us through the week, trying to sort of pitch the content at an appropriate level. And I think sort of trying to teach everyone these concepts in a week is already quite a daunting challenge. To then have a hackathon at the end of this week where you expect students to actually build something is even more daunting, which I think sort of really then puts into context how blown away we were by the quality of the submissions that the students made. I've partaken in a few hackathons myself. I was actually at the Interledger Hackathon at the summit in Costa Rica last year, and I hope I'm not stepping on anyone's toes here, but I think a lot of the ideas produced at the hackathon 2 weeks ago were better than a lot of the ideas I've seen at sort of at hackathons that had full-time developers working at.
I think that's one of the great things about working with students and people who have not necessarily been exposed to this for a very long time, is they come up with ideas that people who have been working in this space for a long time might not see.
Completely.
So, Dr. Davids, what are some of the use cases that you saw?
So we had sort of solutions, I think, ranging from sort of very technical contributions to sort of contributions that maybe weren't as technically sophisticated, but I think sort of really spoke to a very important use case. So we had 2 groups, of which Dr. Mangle's group was one that sort of looked at using open payments to improve the way that university funding is currently administered. We have a lot of problems with this in South Africa. These payments take a long time to clear. There's not a lot of transparency about when the money is paid and when you're going to receive this. And obviously, when you're a student and you're having to sort of pay for tuition and you're having to pay for accommodation, if your sort of scholarship payments are late, this has a material financial impact on you. So we had some groups looking at trying to use an open payments framework to improve the way these bursaries and scholarships get dispersed. We had another group of students looking at using an open payments framework to sort of improve sort of the way that sort of international relief funding is collected and then dispersed as well, especially sort of in areas that have been affected by natural disasters. The team that won, that I'm very proud to say, is a group of fintech students, of the students from our class, and looked at a very specific use case in South Africa where families take out funeral insurance. So funeral insurance is essentially life insurance, but on the life of your family members, such that if someone were to pass away, you receive a payout from the insurer to cover the cost of a funeral. And a funeral as a sort of social and cultural event is very important in the South African context. And as a result of this, you will typically take out funeral policies for many of your family members. In South Africa, however, the sort of modal family can be quite large. And so there are stories of sort of individuals that have 22 different funeral policies for 22 different family members. And the problem with these policies is that you need to remember to pay these policies. And if you're sort of unable to pay a lot of these policies, or you miss a payment or two, that insurance policy is completely rendered null and void, which means that if a funeral were to happen, that policy doesn't pay out and you're unable to cover the cost of this funeral. So these sort of students looked at using the open payments framework to set up a system of sort of automated payments to help individuals keep track of making these payments to these funeral insurance providers, and in that way making sure that no one ever misses a payment, such that sort of these policies disperse and people are able to lay their loved ones to rest with dignity. So it was really just interesting sort of seeing the sort of standard use cases that we always sort of tell students, okay, this is with financial services, and then seeing a student sort of look at everything that we taught in the week and then apply it to a very specific cultural use case in South Africa, something that we hadn't even mentioned throughout the week. And again, I think that just sort of speaks to the intuitiveness and the simplicity of the sort of open payments framework, that sort of after a week, a student is able to internalize that and immediately apply that to sort of a context very specific to them. It was a very proud moment as an educator being able to see some of those submissions.
I'm sure. So working with universities in this way has been a learning experience for me, as far as going through the processes of trying to give universities money. I thought it would be a lot easier. It's been a lesson in learning about processes, bureaucracy, and a lesson in patience. So I'm curious from your end, what benefits or hurdles have you experienced advancing this work on campus and working with administration and other professors? Dr. Mangle, we'll start with you, and then Dr. Davids, you can answer after.
I just want to loop back to Dr. Davids. I think our idea was still the best. No, just kidding. Dr. Davids wasn't on the committee, the voting committee. So there's
Well, quickly share with us what your
it was NFAS, so it was the financial aid one, which I think is really students understanding the context. The funeral one, I felt that was more personal.
But the funeral, yes, but isn't that kind of related with the financial aid? Because Dr. Davids talked about the financial aid in South Africa, but that is not just, in South Africa. That's an issue that's in the United States as well. And that's something that I experienced when I was a student.
Oh, yeah, we had the same issue. It's speed, transparency, and what happens. So I can explain it in context to South African students. Like, what happens is students, it's not a lot of students, but a small students will get evicted from housing. So if you're renting a place and you're like, oh, I have financial aid to cover the rent, and Bowie, like many campuses, does not have enough housing sometimes for students. So you get off-campus housing. Well, off-campus housing doesn't really care about your financial aid. So if you miss 2-3 months, you can be evicted. And that usually happens to one student on our campus every semester. Like, it just isn't something they did. There was a paperwork issue. And then keeping track of payments. So the other issue is, like, where open payments, we tried to phrase it as like NFAS, which is the group in South Africa, could then select institutions and they could directly pay students. You could see it in real time. So, like, has a payment made, has not been made, because we have some bureaucratic structure where it's like so many people have to touch it. Just sort of like cross-border payments, like so many banks and intermediaries, you have to follow where the money goes. That becomes an issue for students, like where is it in the process? And open payments adds a layer of transparency to this. And that was big in the funeral payments example too. Like you could see if you made a payment or missed a payment, and you'd have a history of those payments. So um,
Yeah, so talking about the slow bureaucracy and getting payments done, so what has been your experience with working with administration on campus and trying to move forward with this initiative?
it's been a learning experience, to put it. I don't like to bite the hand that feeds, and that's my employer. But I think you have in Bowie State and like any University of Sister Maryland institution that getting money or dollars into the institution and to the right locations is very difficult. Like even a reimbursement for trips, like it requires 6 signatures. So if I get like if I try and reimburse for, I think I reimbursed for $20. I don't know why I did that. I sometimes like to see the process before I have to do a major one. And it was like my chair needs to sign it, my dean needs to sign it, someone in HR needed to sign it, the provost needed to sign it, someone in our office of accounts needed to sign it. And that's not even bringing in funds. That's like going through one channel and side channel. It's challenging. Like, and I want to say that we through Interledger went through a foundational arm instead of the traditional Office of Project and Sponsored Grants and Research. But there's so much paperwork involved in that sometimes that takes away energy from all stakeholders. It takes away from energy I can provide students, energy I can put into the project. And went through the foundation that took a few layers of the bureaucracy away from it. But I want to be clear, like the benefits of this. Like if you can get through like I really don't want to, I want to be like, they're challenges, but they're worth going through the challenges. I want to say personally perspective, like it has changed me and my career trajectory. Like it's opened my eyes. We're now working beyond campus. It's challenged my thinking. It's pushed me out of my comfort zone in a positive way. And this opportunity, as soon as you can get through that bureaucracy, like, oh, a world has opened up.
Yeah, I guess the question that one of the question that I'm trying to get to is how to make it easier for other universities or educational institutions to participate, and what are some tips and tricks that they should use. And I'll direct that question to Dr. Davids.
Certainly. I mean, I think to sort of echo Dr. Mangle's experiences, I think the initial setup cost for the grant at UCT were quite sizable. But once again, sort of if you're able to work through that, you get to this promised land on the other side. I think the really useful thing about, I think, Bowie State and sort of University of Cape Town going through this experience is that sort of someone has done it, and there's a bit of a blueprint for what went right. And there's certainly a blueprint for what went wrong as well. And it's obviously going to be the case that sort of each university is going to have a specific set of regulations. It's going to have a specific set of requirements with respect to sort of how this funding gets dispersed, how these grant agreements are signed. But at least sort of having worked with different funders in the past, I think what really helps, at least in sort of our context, is the fact that we were working with a foundation. I think sort of certainly when you're working with a foundation, in many cases, universities are quite skeptical when it comes to sort of working with sort of certain types of funders. I mean, I've heard of stories at our universities or at our university and other universities in South Africa where funding has come from a crypto company where the funding has been tied to the value of crypto, and the value of crypto, falls overnight, and suddenly there's sort of funding that's being threatened as well. So I think as a result of these experiences, university administrations are, I think, rightly and justifiably skeptical of many of these sort of funding agreements, and especially the security thereof. But I think sort of working with the foundation and sort of the foundation sort of really showing that sort of the purpose of this work is to advance digital payments. It's to advance digital financial inclusion around the world. There's no profit motive attached to any of this. There's not a requirement that at the end of the day, we're going to give you scholarships, but we're going to need these students to work back these hours by coming to work for the foundation. I sort of think the foundation has been very upfront with its intentions, and I think the university able to see that and sort of see that the foundation is in this for the long run has certainly helped things on our side, and I think sort of makes working with the ILF a lot different to working with some of the other funders we've worked with in the past few years.
Yeah, it was difficult coming to different professors with that because they were expecting us to ask something like, no, we really don't want anything from you. We want to give you this money and we want to start this program to increase the tech pipeline and to increase knowledge in open payments. And we were met with a lot of skepticism.
Can I also say that now with the Next Gen grant, you can actually go directly to Interledger. Like you don't have to go through someone else needs to send it to you. It needs to trickle down to you. Like you can skip the steps. Like, and I think that's Dr. Davids point out. Like there are other people to help. Like we can tell you, we can basically say this is what they've asked for, and if there's any question like who has ever done this before, and I think Dr. Davids and we take advantage of first movers advantage. But there's also like being on the cutting edge sometimes has a little bit of pain that someone's going to mild, I think short-term pain. So I think we're both here to help and assist and to basically emphasize like it's done so much for our students. These have been great opportunities. And I think we're really doing amazing things.
Thank you. I agree. So I'm curious from you both, what do you feel is the future of advancing digital financial payments in the education space, and how can we best target the students to become involved in this? Dr. Mangle?
I think that the big thing is just awareness of this open payment space is going to be more prevalent as if you've attended a summit or any of these events, like this push to digital finance, like we're pushing these tools and do people understand these tools? And realistically, it's a bifurcation or a splitting, like those that have access to them and those that do not. And I think that overall awareness, there's a human element of that. There's a software element of that. And I think there's some overall initiatives to really address this digital financial exclusion of a large segment of the world population. I think it's over like 1.5 billion people. Academic, I think community members, like participants, can help with inclusion. That starts with awareness, because without these focused efforts, like the status quo is a go and they'll leave people behind. And I think that's a real issue. I'm concerned with this digital finance without these efforts, digital finance will exacerbate existing inequities globally. So we need to do some sort of intervention, some sort of oversight, community development, and some sort of engagement. I think how we recruit students is we present them with ideas, and I think there's a big push for our roles for developing them for long-term careers in the space. And I think that's multifaceted. Again, team collaborations, open source, a little bit of activism in here, speaking out, engaging with community members that are directly impacted by this financial exclusion to bring them on and support. So I think like awareness and then making them active community members. And I think we've done a good job bringing them to the community like academia, like that is not just our responsibility as faculty. I think the Interledger community as a whole has embraced students, and not just students, any person who wants to address these digital financial inclusion challenges, they're welcome. I think anyone, regardless of, you don't need to be a this or a that, or you don't need to be a major, or this is what I do. Like just if you generally want to make an impact, Interledger has been very supportive and inclusive.
Thank you. And Dr. Davids, did you want to add to that?
I think the sort of awareness point is really important. And I think a lot of students, and I think a lot of sort of us, are generally quite disillusioned with the current financial system, sort of the way it operates. We sort of see growing income inequality, wealth inequality around the world. And it leaves us with questions about whether or not sort of these services are meeting our needs. But I think sort of in the classroom setting, it's especially important to, I think, try to address these subjects with a bit more rigor than you're maybe going to see outside of the classroom. I think sort of a lot of students certainly know that there are problems with the way payments work, but it's really trying to expose them to what exactly it is about the system that leads to these problems, right? Is this policy driven? Is this technology driven? So I think sort of one thing that we tried to do with the bootcamp this week was to essentially do a finance payments 101. Right, so it's like in order to innovate, you have to have a sort of solid understanding of sort of what's happening within the status quo. And then I think sort of when you are able to highlight the status quo in a sort of very clear and very structured way, students then immediately, you can see the sort of cogs turning in their brain going, oh, wait, I can suddenly see why this is a problem. Oh, these sort of things make sense as well. So I definitely think as educators, we have an important role to play in terms of sort of designing content that in a sense is objective, but that also tries to sort of shine a magnifying lens on a lot of these issues, and try to address these issues with a lot of rigor in the classroom, in the hope that sort of students are then sort of able to better understand the complexities of a lot of these issues, which I think then sort of gives them a firm foundation to innovate from. So I think a large part of the responsibility lies with educators to make sure that we're designing our curriculum in a way that is ensuring that sort of students can engage with these topics at the level that we need them to.
I think you're absolutely right. We have found the best way for us to make inroads into a school is to find a professor like both of you who are very passionate about moving this work forward. So again, thank you both. So now we're going to take some questions from the audience. And the first one is, how do your students understand the job market that they might be preparing for? And I think that would be an interesting perspective to come from both of you, considering you're in two different countries.
It certainly is a very difficult thing to try to sort of help students understand the job market. I think we put students in two very difficult predicaments in their life. One, at the end of school, when we ask them to choose a degree to go and study, or a sort of course of study that essentially puts them on a sort of path dependency for the rest of their career without really knowing what they're interested in. And secondly, we then have them choose a job at the end of this university degree, not really knowing what's sort of happening out there in the private sector. So a big part of what we try to do is expose students frequently with a variety of actors in the space. These could be universities, these could be national government in South Africa, these could be startups, companies. And at least in our program, we do this through a very specific mechanism, which we call a practitioner seminar. And sort of every 2 weeks, we invite a company to sort of come onto campus, give a bit of a talk to our students, tell them what they're doing, and also give our students an opportunity to interrogate these companies as well. We do that every 2 weeks, and we try to ensure that there is a good variety of companies that end up coming to speak to our students. But because our degree program is around sort of 5-6 years old, we sort of also have a very strong alumni network of ex-students as well. And we really try to make sure that we are linking our current students up with some of our past students that are working in sort of different sectors as well, such that they're able to sort of share experiences, share lessons as well. I think students are skeptical generally when some mid-40, mid-50-year-old comes to campus and tries to tell them about what the job market's like. But I think they're a lot more receptive to that advice when it comes from someone that's been in their position a few years ago. So leveraging the alumni networks we have with past students is definitely an important mechanism for us as well. Andrew?
I agree. I'm going a different perspective that I think are aligned but different. I think when students trying to understand the job market, it's like they have a very narrow view of the job market. They have there's a time component to it. There's how many data points do they have to form a perspective. It's sort of like if you look at Interledger and just look at the website, you cannot form the whole picture and see the bigger landscape. So I don't think they really understand. And their goal is just to get hired. So they see a job post and they apply, but they really do a deep dive on it. I don't know. The bad news is they usually learn about the job market the more data points they collect. And they're usually collecting more data points because things are not going well. So they learn about the job market through, I didn't get hired, I got rejected, but I have no idea why I didn't get rejected. I then look at what people are hiring for. I don't have those. Do I decide if I'm going to collect those skills, competencies, or do more? The way I try and help them, I think academia does a pretty good job of this, is trying to provide the ecosystem to them. Like there's one of our student scholars at Bowie State aggregated a whole spreadsheet together to be like, here are all the careers in open payments. I think there's other things that we could do better for helping them understand. I think providing students with people they admire within open payments, which is something we did at Bowie through like Bowie is an HBCU. It's a historically black college and university. Like bringing presenters that look like students who've had the same student life experience as students, so they can see people like, oh, I can do this. Like this is inclusive. They'll allowing people to actually observe what they're doing. So like, what does the work look like? So what if you're in open payments? Like, what does your job look like? And ask them to develop a hypothesis about the roles, how they would align. And then the goal is they can test things out. So we've done that through micro internships, student scholars, so you can actually see what someone does and work with others as a piece to help understand the job market in a dynamic that most students do not get access to. Like they can actually see, like, it's not just a job title or a job description. Like this is what people do, and this is how they could see themselves working. So I want to be clear, like that's a real challenge, understanding the job market. Then here's some of the things we're trying to do to give a holistic perspective.
Thank you. Another question that we touched a little bit on during our hour together is, since you have both been building these programs, what is a piece of advice you would give universities considering applying? And what advice would you give ILF as we continue to grow our Interledger on Campus initiative?
At least from my side, since I feel like I was in this position, given that Dr. Mangle was the first university there, I sort of felt I was sort of applying to something that had already pre-existed. I would say, I think, especially sort of, at least in the sort of African or sort of South African context, we very often see the work of foundations and foundation based in the US, and you think US centric. But I think a really important thing to emphasize for universities that, you know, you should be emphasizing your context. You should be emphasizing what makes sort of your part of the world different. And you should see that as an advantage. You should see that as something to be celebrated in your application, and not something to go, oh, I'm going to try to frame this in the most sort of US centric way as I possibly can. Because I think sort of a large part of the foundation's work is specifically trying to sort of uplift communities in parts of the world that have typically been underlooked. So I think sort of any universities considering applying, if your university is different and you're from a country that has typically been underserved with respect to academic funding, don't see that as a reason that you should not be applying. That is precisely the reason that you should be applying.
Yes, exactly. And I do want to say that we are not, we're not US centric. This application opportunity is open to anyone across the world who's looking to implement this at their campus. Dr. Mangle, did you have anything to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think the real benefits for university is, and at least in the US, they talk about innovation. Like being able to be innovative through a grant is very challenging. Like to try something new and to have the support to try something new, like having a sounding board, and then you're also going to have access to a bigger community. Like there's very few grants that are like encouraging you to do something innovative, encouraging you to do experiential, encouraging engagement with the flexibility of like, whatever you said, you got to do it. And that sometimes you get stuck in a grant where you are locked into a bad idea. And that's sort of where I had hypotheses I tested, and then we had to pivot. And that's some of the flexibility. Like I'm used to rigid grants where you're like, I messed up here, and you can't ever turn around. Like you had to keep on digging the hole because you said that's what you were going to do. And we've been quick on like, here's the data, here's what's going on, let's pivot, let's move forward. So for universities, that's key. I think that the real gap for Interledger was like getting more people on board. And I think that's like the more people we have on board in an open community, the more powerful and more impactful we'll be. And I think that's been looking for opportunities for growth. I think the career space is one that will benefit everyone so people can see how they can fit in. I think we continually work on that, and I don't think these are any unknowns. I want to be clear, like, well, I wasn't waiting for the salon to be like, surprise, I have a big idea I have of holding here. That there's been ongoing communication, and that's something where often when you're on a grant, you're on an island. Like you're on a reporting island where you basically throw something over the fence, and hopefully that's what they wanted. Open dialogues with the Slack channel, asking questions. You have access to developers, you have access to community members, you have access to previous grant active developers. So like you should have access to a lot of people that is like, I'm like a small fish in a big pond, and I feel like it's a real pond here with a lot of fishes I like being around. So it's been great for me, and I'd encourage everyone to at least explore. And I strongly recommend to apply. This has been a phenomenal opportunity, and it's great being a part of this team.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Mangle. And thank you, Dr. Davids, for joining us today. Please, if you're thinking about applying to the opportunity, find us at interledger.org, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all for today's episode. Thank you for tuning into the Future Money podcast. As the summer progresses, please note that we'll deliver one episode each month. We will return to our regular schedule on September 10th. We hope you continue appreciating our discussions on digital financial inclusion and its worldwide impact. Keep in mind that it's not just about the access to banking, it's about empowering individuals and communities to use digital tools to build a better future. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you listen to your pods.